slice of pie. As many others like yourself are enjoying the morning of December 7, 1941, a horrific report comes across the cafe's radio. The bombing of Pearl Harbor was announced. This is exactly what one 17-year-old boy experienced. It impacted him so much that he decided to enlist in the Marines to help fight for his country. Now please enjoy the fascinating interview of Manuel de la Torre in his extraordinary journey of fighting in the South Pacific.
Hi, I'm Christopher de la Torre, and this is my grandfather, Manuel de la Torre. I'm going to be interviewing him about his times in World War II. When were you born and where were you born?
I was born in 1923, March 3rd of 1923 in Puerto Rico.
What were your parents' names and where were they from?
Well, my father's name was Peter, and my mother's name was Petra. They were both Spaniards background, yes.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up between Puerto Rico and the Bronx, New York.
How old were you when World War II began?
I was about 19 years old when World War II began.
What were your earliest memories of childhood?
They were very exciting. Growing up back home with my cousins in a farm, in school. I had a super time as a child.
Do you remember any of the events that led to the beginning of the war?
Well, from what I understand, Japan needed oil to build up the military. And we stopped them from monitoring to build up their industries. We also opposed their expansions to the South Asia to obtain oil.
Do you remember where you were when Pearl Harbor was announced and what you were doing?
Well, I was working in Manhattan, New York. I was working when the news came over the radio about Pearl Harbor being attacked. It was very disturbing, very upsetting, very confusing. But that I remember very well.
What was the general feeling in the United States when the announcement about Pearl Harbor was made?
Well, we were out of rage that they skipped us and they attacked without a declaration of war. We became united in a war effort. We were ready to endure unnecessary sacrifices to defeat our enemies.
Did you or any of your family serve in the war?
No, I don't. Outside of joining the Marine Corps, I don't think that any of my family served during the war. No.
What branch of service did you participate in?
I was in the Marine Corps. I was on a airline squadron 131. And it was more like a submarine division. And we served over an aircraft carrier.
Where was your base? Where were you stationed at?
You mean overseas or?
Where were you stationed in America?
Oh, well, we have our training over in Paris Island, South Carolina. I'm from South Carolina. Paris Island, we were detached to San Diego, California. From San Diego, we simply were shipped overseas.
Did you fight in Germany or in South Pacific?
We were in the South Pacific.
Do you remember any of the places that you traveled to while you were there?
Well, we traveled through different islands from Espiritu Santos and Guadalcanal and Guam and Marshall Islands close to the Philippines. We were traveling all around the ocean.
What were your impressions of the political and military leaders during the war?
We have confidence in our civilians and military leaders that they will lead us up to victory. That was my impression.
Did any Americans oppose the war, or did they demonstrate against being in the war?
That was a very small minority group that they were very oppressed, very depressed about the fact that there was a war going on.
What one event on the war is most vivid in your memory?
There was quite a few of them, but I will never forget General MacArthur when he stated the fact that I shall return to the Philippines. That left a very deep impression in my heart. I shall return, meaning that I wasn't ready to accept the fate.
How were Japanese Americans and German Americans treated in the United States during the war?
Well, there was a resentment about the fact that against the German Americans and the Japanese, but there was a very understanding relationship between the fact that the Germans, it was a relationship and there was an understanding, a good understanding. And as for the Japs, the Japanese, they were impregnated into a military camp in California. And some of them, they were retracted to join the army, and they were sent to Italy to fight against the Europeans.
How did the war affect the lives of the women in your family, the women that you knew?
The women's, they were back then, the women's, they applied for men's job while the men's joined the army, and they were separated, but the women stood behind, reimbursing us, backing us up during the war.
How did World War II change your life?
World War II set up an impression in my life that was a very understanding, very well-related, a very emotional change of life that I had to accept as a change for betterment, which to this day it has been great.
How do you think the war changed the society in America?
Well, to my expectations, the Southerners, they moved up to the north to obtain work. Women went into work to replace the men during the war, and while the men were entering the army, the women replaced the men, and there was a lot of enlargement of work between Northerners and Southerners. I thought it was great.
How did the war affect the American economy after many years of an economic depression?
It turned out to be a completed around instead of a large unemployment during the Depression to more work available after the war. There was more possibilities, more openings after the war.
Did any of your family members work in a war-related industry?
Not that I can recall. I don't recall because most of my family they were back home in Puerto Rico, and I don't recall. I had a cousins that they joined the Army and the Air Force, but I don't recall anyone else being involved.
What was the reaction whenever the atomic bomb was dropped?
It was very exciting knowing that the war will be over very soon after the atomic bomb.
Where were you when you heard the news that the war was over?
No, the war was over. I was on furlough from overseas. I was back home in New York when the news came over that the war was over.
What was the reaction of America when the war had ended?
It was jubilant. We were ready for the future. It was exciting that the war was over. It was very exciting.
The people that lived through the Great Depression and World War II have been called the greatest generation. Do you think that is true, or were you just the unluckiest generation?
I will agree to the fact that it was the greatest generation. Definitely.
Do you think that World War II was a good war?
It was certainly a good war. It was righteous and it was necessary to understand relationships.
Do you consider it a just war?
I certainly do.
What do you think America learned from fighting in the Second World War?
Well, we learned teamwork. We learned to reject isolation. We learned to fulfill that we had to stop to love our enemies. We have to understand, we have to develop relationships to understand problems and solve them, to relate, love and care.
Do you think that today the young people would respond to a major war the way that the people of your generation responded?
I doubted that they will. I doubted that they will respond the way we did in our days.
Do you think that your thoughts about the war are shared with a majority of the people who are from your generation?
I certainly do. I certainly do believe that. Yes, sir.
Okay, well that's the end of my interview. Thank you very much.
I love you.